Well, welcome back, everyone. Hopefully you've enjoyed our previous episodes. Again, we are going to start talking a little bit more about the economics of the pre-Civil War, getting a little understanding of how that's going to go. So,
we talked last time. We showed you this chart, how massive the production level of the North was compared to the South. In almost every category except cotton. Everything else, it's two to one is like the smallest number. Population, 4 to 1.
And the big one here, again, firearms production, 32 to 1 for the North. I mean, with that massive number of manufacturing, gosh.
It just seems this war is a foregone conclusion.
Right.
The North will power down on the South, and the war will be over quickly. The only thing giving the South any sort of opportunity is the fact that they take the cream of the Army.
Right.
The leadership of the Army.
Jeb Stuart,
Robert General Lee, Longstreet.
Right.
I mean, just these guys who, unlike the North, who got the guys who finished at the bottom of the class.
Exactly.
They're getting the guys that finished at the top of the class, the ones that were writing the manuals and deciding how to fight wars in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And here it is. So you've got this, the South has to win soon.
Right.
I mean, and I don't think you'd probably find a Southerner who wouldn't admit that.
Oh, no.
North is just bigger, more population, more industries.
Well, in the South, they understand. They understand. They are the ones rebelling.
They're the ones trying to become separate, just like the American colonies, which they would constantly bring up.
And they do.
Fighting against England. They're fighting against tyranny from Washington. And that's their propaganda side of the story.
Well,
and the North starts with preserve the Union.
Yes.
And not as popular as it could be.
No.
A lot of riots when the drafts are instituted. A lot of people basically saying, I don't want slavery, but I'm not going to go force somebody in Georgia to live my way of life.
Exactly.
And so the war kicks off. Fort Sumter, one guy, a Confederate as a matter of fact, dies when one of his guns explodes. I mean, so fairly bloodless there, but Sumter couldn't be reinforced because it would have triggered the war earlier.
It would have.
And Buchanan, because he was president for most of this period, was refusing to push things further, which of course you can't really blame him. He's trying to stomp on a lit fuse.
Oh, for sure. And it doesn't work.
At this point, I think the breach is irreparable without bloodshed.
Right.
It just doesn't seem like there's any way. And so the Union gathers its army together and marches out to war and meets them at a place they would call Bull Run, but we agreed last time that since the South wins, we'll call it Manassas. And I'll slip up and call it Bull's Run because my blue belly will show.
I'm originally a Kansan anyway, so I am blue through and through. So unfortunately, that's that way.
Pennsylvania and Kansas.
Yeah,
so,
and I also have family from Illinois, so I'm definitely there.
We're unionized, pretty much.
But you notice again that this was supposed to be a somewhat short war in the beginning.
And as we mentioned, a spectator sport.
Yes.
Nobody was taking the concept that this was going to be bloody seriously. It was going to be about, flashing sabers and cavalry charges, and everything was going to be, well, they didn't have movies yet.
Right.
But this was their thinking.
You can imagine.
War's going to be over by Christmas.
Right.
And then 5,000 dead. Well, casualties. I don't know if it's all dead.
Yeah, well, and of course, casualties means and you know this as well as I do, being a veteran, if you do not show up for the morning formation, you are considered a casualty.
Well, yeah, because they don't have any other way. They don't have a way of, calling home or anything like that.
Or even have like the sick call.
Right.
To make sure that
they would have muster,
right,
which of course was their morning roll call. And so the next day, that's how they get their numbers, basically.
Right.
And then, of course, they'll count the people in the hospital. But the dreadful thing that becomes fairly obvious is they have a severe shortage of doctors.
Right.
Because this war is going to cause more casualties than they ever thought imaginable. And Manassas is not a big battle.
No.
It's not a lot of numbers on either side.
We're going to see major battles here within this video, and it's going to be very
40 and 50,000 on a side kind of numbers.
Yes.
And this is, can't remember, I think it's like 20,000 to 15,000 or something
Yeah,
like that.
somewhere-
And the Union,
somewhere
of course, with
small.
the bigger numbers.
Right.
But in the scale of the Civil War is small.
Yes.
It's like an opening, it's like the first card on a fight night.
Right.
It's the welterweights are out there.
These are the little guys, just, okay, here we go. And now by 1863, 1864,
We have
you're going.
European-sized armies.
Right. You're getting 50, 60, 70,000 together.
And marching,
And
you got
marching.
as much together as an army that day marched. But
Right.
We'll talk about that later.
Right. So moving on, we're going to kind of give you an understanding of how this all worked with the first plans of the Union, for instance. So what Lincoln's advisor, and especially a former general of a war, Winfield, old Fuss and Feathers Scott, who, well, he was pretty fussy when he didn't get his meals. But anyway, Winfield Scott, he had an idea of what, well, you can see, an anaconda. Well, of course, an anaconda is a constrictor snake. And so the purpose of this was threefold. First was blockade southern ports. And I know we don't want to really bog ourselves down in the Navy, but when you have the North controlling most of those naval vessels, it's easy for them to blockade these southern ports all around here, the Gulf, and along the eastern seaboard. The second leg of this was to split this Confederacy in two. And as you'll see on these arrows, they used the rivers to really make that possible. And so you cut off here some of these western states like Arkansas, Louisiana, and Texas. Not much of happening out here in the early, even into the late years of the war, but
Not a lot of population.
no. I mean,
Once you leave Louisiana.
right. Once you leave here, especially this Baton Rouge and New Orleans area, you don't have much out here. And then the third leg, as you'll notice also on the board here, it is to drive that stake into the heart and destroy the morale of the Southerner.
A plan, despite the fact that it seems, got to give Winfield Scott his credit.
Right.
It's a plan that plays to the North's strengths.
Right.
It's a slow-moving,
Mm-hmm.
naval base to start with.
Right.
And the naval blockade is wildly successful, really.
It is.
The South takes great pleasure when they get a smuggler through the blockade.
Mm-hmm.
But we're talking one cargo of cotton is not going to fight you a war.
No.
And so the South is suddenly cut off from its main source of currency.
Right.
And they're trying to get the English and the French to come in on their side. And the English especially know what it's like to fight when there's a navy controlling the sea, because they lost to us the first time with the French
Right.
controlling the sea.
Right. So the English are a little hesitant, and the French. I mean,
And the French, I
are-
think they were a lot more torn.
Right.
Because they'd established, I mean, both countries were, had abolished slaves in their home countries.
Right.
I don't know that either one of them had abolished slavery anywhere else in their empires.
Not yet, I don't believe. You're right. I don't think they have yet, but we are moving towards that idea.
Right, and it's built into our documents, Declaration of Independence. It's built into the French independence, the French Revolution.
Right. The Declaration of Rights and Man.
I mean, it very obviously applies. Once you recognize blacks as fellow men,
Right.
these documents have to apply.
Right.
And so you see this kind of thing going. But this plan is just a crush. It's not a sweeping move quickly to
No.
take Richmond or even
No.
Atlanta. It's we're going to slowly strangle them.
Mhm.
We've got the industry, we've got the manpower. Let's use it the best way we can. So, kudos to Winfield Scott for coming up with possibly the only plan that the North could have worked with.
Yes. Exactly. And it does. It is a slow-moving process. It takes about 3 to 4 years for this to actually be complete and crush the South's morale. But again, it does make its ultimate defeat, but it takes a while. Anyway,
So the South, of course, knows this is coming.
right.
Whether they know about the Anaconda Plan in detail or not, it doesn't really matter.
No.
Because you have a situation where they've got to win wherever they go. Again, 2.5 times the population in the north.
Yes.
4.5 times the number of men between 18 and 45.
Mhm.
So fighting men.
Yes.
So they know they got to win quick. So Lee gathers this new army that they're putting together instead of the little one they thought could win.
Right.
And
Manassas.
they move north.
Yes.
Because they've got to take Washington, but they don't want to take Washington because it has such ties to their own history.
Exactly.
They need to push north and isolate Washington.
Right. And another thing about this is that, again, you see the South wants to take this to the North.
Mhm.
And again, by September of 62, the North has fought multiple battles in Virginia and on Southern soil. So Lee finally realizes we've got to move to their territory, break their farms up, make the North feel like what we felt. And it does work. It does work, because you'll notice here, 24,000 casualties in one day. One day.
And an absolutely bloody nightmare. And again, so in both North and South,
Right.
they're not just drafting people to carry guns, they're drafting butchers to become doctors because they're the only ones that have the stomach to cut off these arms and legs because they have no way to prevent gangrene. Even if you get your leg cut off, your chances of dying are about 50-50.
Right.
And that's if you're young and healthy.
And again, that's why they call it a sawbones.
Yes.
Okay, they call the doctors sawbones.
Very much.
And it makes it more difficult because, again, these people who are becoming these doctors and well, ultimately ex-butchers cause more problems for the North, because now you have people who are now being just straight maimed.
Oh, it takes not much. But if there was any significant damage to a limb, amputation was the only option.
Yes.
Well, let you bleed out. That
Yeah.
was the other option. Or gangrene eventually sits in. Because
Yes.
if you don't get, the problem is that the ranges they're shooting, the wadding that they use on the muskets gets into the wound
Right.
and gets infected rapidly.
Right.
So it's just, it's hard to imagine. If you've ever seen the movie Gettysburg, they have a scene where one of the generals goes to the tent
Oh my gosh,
outside
it's
the
terrible.
hospital. It's just a barrel
Right.
of arms and legs
Right.
that have been amputated. And the only people that have the stomach for this are butchers. That's what they do. It's to animals. Not all the butchers were able to deal with it either.
No.
Not all of them could transfer that thinking to people. But yeah, it didn't take a whole lot of technique.
No.
Once you learn the basics of how to fold the skin and sew it up,
Yep.
and give them a chance to survive.
Yeah.
And that'll come into play next week when we talk about after the war.
And here's the other thing too. We're talking 1862, 1863. There is no such thing as anesthesia. There is no such thing as antiseptics. So when you're a soldier and you're in a field hospital and you may have a mini ball that has shattered your femur or your tibia or your whatever, the only thing you can honestly say is bite down on that bullet, son.
And I mean, they did know about the use of ether, but it was not in enough supply to even handle anything close to this.
No.
It would have been out in probably 20 minutes.
And especially when, again, you have 20+ thousand.
I mean, and Mr. Semmelweis over in Europe had discovered these little weird things floating around
Right.
that he thought caused infection, but that hadn't become, because they'd already stuck him in an asylum. Because he was blaming doctors for these infections.
Yes.
Especially for childbed fever.
Well, and it's true.
And it was true, but they didn't want to hear
They
that.
didn't. No, of course not.
Their
They-
malpractice insurance would go up.
Exactly. They would think of him being, oh my God, you're pretty much like a heretic.
Yes, you're blaming doctors for helping people.
Yes.
It's really what it came down to. But anyway,
Right. Going on.
Antietam ends up as a draw.
Yes.
Which is possibly the best thing that could happen to the North
Yes.
in the Civil War at this early stage, because they keep losing all these battles. Their army gets routed. It's very similar to the Revolutionary
Yeah,
War.
right.
for so many years, Washington was just the best manager of defeat in the history of the military.
Right.
But Lee is, not only can he not go north, it's a draw. Because of the situation, he can't guard these giant supply lanes. He has to pull down.
Right.
Back into Virginia.
Right.
Which means it's a victory for the North.
And that, and again, is the best thing that the North could have. Because again, we in the northern states were like, oh my God, we've been doing this for 2 long years and we don't know what to do any longer. We're sick and tired of it all. We're wanting to have now a chance of survival.
Well, and it goes back to the Anaconda Plan.
Right.
Really, all the people in the Potomac Valley,
Mm-hmm.
all Union troops needed in the Potomac Valley is don't lose.
Right.
Don't lose Philadelphia.
Right.
Don't lose New York. Don't let Washington get surrounded. That's
Right.
really all they need to do. That's all they need. And I guess playing defense,
Mm-hmm.
it's something that the Union Army, because we're already gone through what, by 1862, what, 4 generals?
At least. Because of course McClellan, I mean, he is set in watch McClellan. And
Yes.
well, and that's what happens. We go through McClellan. He's quick in getting out of this job.
Yes.
But then we go through another and another and another, where the South has won through the 4 years of this
Yes, they
fighting.
have one commanding general for the entire war, which is amazing given the fact how it turns.
Right,
That they don't give up on him just because he lost a battle.
right,
Whereas in the North, losing a major battle could literally lose you the war.
right.
Because if Washington falls, the war's probably lost. Because
Mm-hmm.
the Union does stake a whole lot in keeping Washington out of the hands of the South, even though it's technically in a border state.
Right. And again, you have to think about it. When Lincoln is thinking about all of these changes that are wanting to happen, he understands he's a politician, first and foremost, okay? He's wanting to make certain that something good can happen
Yeah.
before he just goes off the rails.
Well, again, up until this point here, January 1st, 63,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the main battle cry is preserve the Union. It's
Right.
not a huge seller, but with a victory like Antietam.
Which is, again, a draw. We
But
must,
for the North,
Right,
a victory,
a victory.
because Lee has to retreat.
yes.
And anytime that Lee's retreating,
Mm-hmm.
that's a win. And
Yes.
really for the North, it really is.
Right,
Especially in the public opinion
right,
variety,
right.
which allows Lincoln to, I guess, in the sense of motivation, expand the war.
Yes. And now, again, it changes the mindset, especially of maybe not so much politicians, but
Republicans, though.
for sure,
They are-
Republicans.
You know, the
And-
know-nothings, and those
yes.
guys are all part of that Republican base.
Yes. And so you'll see here that again, the Emancipation Proclamation is now not to preserve the Union, like we said before. It was to now free those slaves.
Mhm.
And again, it, as you'll see, freed those in rebellious states. Now, why are they only doing it in the rebellious states?
Because they don't want Kentucky to flip or Maryland to flip.
Of course not.
Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri are all slave states, but they had not joined the Confederates. The idea of freeing the slaves in those states that are technically loyal to Washington
Mhm.
would be very non-politic.
Right, right. And so as you'll see again, it does another major change. It keeps that European understanding.
Yeah, the victory more than the emancipation.
Right.
It's kind of like Saratoga in the Revolutionary War.
Right.
It proved to the French we could fight.
Right.
Antietam proves to the English and the French the Union's not just going to fold.
Right.
And so backing the Confederates doesn't seem like as good of a bet, because the English and the French can do the math too.
Mm-hmm.
The population difference, the industry difference, the
Mhm.
money difference. It's
Well,
ugly.
And it's no different. I mean, just like in the Revolutionary War, the English and the French, they send people to the Confederates' camp, and they say, "We're going to watch you, and we're going to help you as best we can from afar."
Kind of like advisors.
Yes.
Well, and then again, the movie Gettysburg shows the
Mhm.
one English colonel
Mm-hmm.
that's present observing.
Right.
And, you know, the interesting names that we have. It's,
It is just
it's
kind of a...
they get their toes just a
Mhm,
little bit
mhm,
wet, but they
yeah.
definitely never commit.
Right. And so as you'll see, we go now away from this understanding of let's hurry up and wait.
Well, at least don't lose for the North.
Right.
And for the South, though, that eastern zone is vital
Mhm.
because it's the only way they can win a knockout blow early.
Is by, again,
Going
not
out to
gonna-
Illinois does
right.
not help them.
No,
in
not
the
at all.
slightest.
Not at all.
Just it would waste
Well,
time and
it-
insurance supplies.
You have, but and again, in Illinois, what are you going to do? You have such a strong northern understanding that no southerner would have been able to change their mind. Maybe in southern Illinois, but even then, it was still a very strong position. We're
Right.
free. We are a free state, and we will always be a free state.
I mean, population-wise, it's kind of similar to the same idea as Arkansas, Louisiana,
Mhm.
Texas. Taking Illinois wouldn't do anything population-wise. Yes, maybe if you go all the way to Chicago, you cut off Kansas and Iowa.
Oh, wow.
Ooh, that's a whole big battle there. But the other thing is it doesn't gain you anything strategically.
Right.
Most of the population is east of there. The industry is east of there.
Mhm.
So a bunch of Kansas farmers can't send letters to D.C. That would. There's no gain for the Confederates to the west.
Of course not.
They have to keep their focused attention to the east.
Yes.
However, the Anaconda Plan says we're going to the west.
Right. And again, we see this as as you would like to call him.
Yeah, useless Slaughter Grant.
Right. I mean, Ulysses Grant, yes, you love him, you may hate him in some aspects, but again, he was that guy. He was like, gosh, how could we put him? He's almost like that movie star for the Union in the West.
Well, after
especially
this,
after
but yeah.
here. But you know, he was the guy that wasn't going to wait around.
Well, he also, I think, more than any other Union general, realized that the only way to win this war is to push.
Right.
You can't sit there and try to maneuver against people who ride horses for a living
Mm-hmm.
when you're all walking.
Right.
I mean, Northern Cavalry was not a whole lot to be bragged about. George Custer, to be
Oh, yeah.
excused.
We'll
We'll give him a pass.
Okay.
But, so, yeah, he uses troops up,
Mm-hmm.
but he wins battles.
Right.
Over and over again.
Like here, the Battle of Shiloh.
And this was a culmination of the
Right.
Cumberland campaign.
Right. Yes. And I mean, again, it starts in northern Tennessee, and he moves his way throughout the state, going right through the middle of Tennessee, down into that place right along. What is it? The Cumberland River?
Cumberland River.
Right, the Cumberland River. And so again, you'll see here in April of '62, this is where again we see major bloody battle of Shiloh, just like what we saw with Antietam, but it's again more Union casualty than it is Confederate.
Right. The Confederates, again, they start trading space for time.
Right.
Or space for men, really.
Right.
They can't afford to lose the men. The battles out here are smaller.
Mhm.
They're not, 15 to 60,000 strong on both sides.
No, but
But they're no less violent.
right,
And they're still bigger than Manassas.
right, exactly.
And again, bloody, because Grant will not be forestalled. If 5 regiments go in and get blown to shreds, he will send 5 more regiments
Right.
if he thinks there's a weak spot.
Yep.
And he will keep sending them until either the Confederates break or he breaks, and he rarely breaks.
Right. That's exactly it. Exactly it. And continuing again with this Anaconda plan of how the Union forces are going to try and split that Confederacy into two, we see here the Battle of New Orleans. And David Farragut, a famous Union admiral, and he is able to ultimately take this battle of, or the city of New Orleans in I want to say June of '62, which again, that helps to solidify.
Well, New
Now-
Orleans is a huge,
Right.
important port for all that trade that comes down the Mississippi.
Right.
Now you have to stop it somewhere, like say a Vicksburg or someplace with a rail line, and ship it over to Mobile, which also is taken.
Yep.
Damn the torpedoes.
Right. Or maybe you take, again, you may ship it to Memphis. But again, Memphis is getting bombarded as well, you know, and you've got Grant right there at Shiloh. We're getting into crunch time.
Yeah, you don't have a lot of spaces that you can, everything that's, well, and of course you don't own the stuff that was shipping stuff down the Mississippi.
Right.
Which is lumber.
Right.
They don't grow the cotton up there as much. Tobacco, which bugs them a lot, except North Carolina's still there, so the South is fine.
Yeah,
they're not going to go into nicotine withdrawal. Don't want that.
No, of course not.
But that anaconda is
starting
just,
to.
You can see the coils getting all the way around because, I mean, New Orleans, that's about as south as you could be.
Exactly.
If you don't count Florida.
Right.
I mean, you're deep, deep south.
Right.
And suddenly there's blue.
Yes.
And there's blue at Mobile.
And
these bridgeheads or these beachheads get bigger and put together. And suddenly that deep south, those states that seceded first, have a bunch of Yankees running around.
And that scares the living bejeebies out of them.
Well, because they don't have the manpower to fight Grant in the north.
No.
Lee's got to have a big army because even though the Union's got incompetent generals, they got a big army.
Yes.
And then now the South, all of a sudden there's 20,000 guys in New Orleans. What are we going to do?
You're literally on three sides, just being taken over, being overran. In that, yes.
You're fighting one country and you're fighting a three-front war.
Right. Yeah.
That's a recipe for disaster.
Yes. I mean, ask any European general. I think they'll understand that too.
Yes.
But again, as we see on the map, again, you know, even though these places are completely separated by, obviously, the Appalachian Mountains, but you notice that Grant is making a major headway into the south as Farragut is moving up the Mississippi. Yes, over here in Virginia, Maryland, parts of West Virginia, there's some major fighting going on, but again, they don't really have the same oomph or importance.
But it's all in Virginia.
Yes, you're
Once
right.
again, Lee's on the defensive.
Right, you're right.
He knows he needs to attack.
Right.
But the Union Army is so big, it's like trying to fight a blob.
Right.
Yes, I won this battle, but then the blob kind of went over here, and I got to get past them.
It's tough, and we will finally see here that there is now a break, a little bit of a break for the Confederates as they finally say, okay, we're going to regroup by 63 and try to do a new maneuver. We'll see how that works, but
Because Lee is very good at maneuver.
yes,
I mean, you see with all the squiggles up there, you'll
Yes.
notice that the red lines are squiggling everywhere.
right, and now you've got the Unions
And the
kind of
Union just kind of moves in one.
right,
One
one
big
continuous.
blob.
Yep. And so the turning point of 1863 is that it is a turning point.
There's no coming back for the South after 1863.
Of course not. And there's two major offensives that we will look at here. And the first, of course, being the battle.
Although I guess technically speaking, Vicksburg was already engaged.
Yes,
in
you're right,
1862.
you're right.
That siege lasted a long time.
Yes, it did. And
But Gettysburg, it gets a movie. Vicksburg doesn't.
oh, of course not. I mean, what are you gonna say?
A siege. We sat around and shot at each other.
Oh my gosh! I ate my last can of meat.
We see the beginning of that trench warfare there too.
Correct.
You've got these entrenchments. Now that's not anything new. Yorktown has entrenchments. I got
Right.
to play on them as a kid. It was amazing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, trenches and barricades and things to keep them out and in. So you have two sets.
Yes.
But the siege takes quite a while because the Union takes a while before Grant can get there.
Yeah.
It takes a while for them to cut all the supply lines.
Right.
And then the siege becomes truly a siege.
Yes.
But Gettysburg is,
Is
that's
the
Lee.
one. Yes.
That's Lee making his chance for the knockout punch.
Right. And here's the thing about a little bit about Gettysburg. We've known that of course we always think, okay, Union in the north, Confederate in the south. Well, Gettysburg is a little bit of a paradox because it goes the opposite. The Confederates are moving up into Pennsylvania and they turn around and come from the north to the south. And then you have the Union forces marching up into Gettysburg, and they kind of just
Well, they meet north of
Yeah.
Gettysburg and then get pushed south
Yes.
of Gettysburg, but that's where the Union line finally holds
right.
on what, day 1 and 2?
Day 1 and 2, yes.
And then it starts to move, it starts rotating.
Right, and it goes more like you mentioned earlier. It goes more a little bit of the east-west maneuver, but it's still the same kind of a philosophy. You
And
know,
that,
it's
and that happens because Lee gets around the left side,
right.
or the right side of the Union side,
Mm-hmm.
and then the Union has to be in pursuit.
Right.
And it's Meade at this time now,
Mhm.
right?
Yes, it is.
And he's also not known for his quick maneuvers.
No, he's not.
But in this case, he actually does seem to get the let out.
Right.
It's slower than his front line.
It is, but
Would prefer, because
Right.
the cavalry's left up there to hang in the wind for quite a while.
but there are some good heroes in Gettysburg.
Gosh, yeah.
Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain at Little Round Top.
Mhm.
I mean, if you've ever seen the movie Gettysburg, Jeff Daniels, I think, plays a really good Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain.
Possibly the best casting for a historical movie I've ever seen.
Right.
They literally went after people that they could, at least with makeup, make them look almost exactly. And they finished the movie with side-by-side pictures, which
is
really show
good,
you
yes.
the fact that they tried. It is, I mean, Gettysburg is bloody.
Yeah,
I
right.
mean, there's just no other way to put it.
I mean,
And, culminating with Pickett's charge.
oh my gosh.
8,000 dead
If you
in the space of what, an hour?
Yes, I mean honestly, if you were a military historian, you would think, "Good God, this is the biggest blunder I've ever seen in my life." And then you'd read about Custer's last stand, but again,
But that's a few men comparatively.
Right.
I mean, what, it's 450 men?
right, and you're right. But Pickett's charge, he knew going into that he was not coming back.
Yeah.
And again, that really was the final stand.
Well, when the Union line held, I mean,
Right.
Pickett's charge almost succeeded. It
Mhm.
reached the wall.
Mm-hmm.
What was that hill called? I can't even remember now. But it was in the center of the Union lines. If they could have pushed through that line, the Union Army gets split in half.
Was that Seminary Hill?
Seminary Ridge.
Seminary Ridge, maybe. I don't know. Anyway,
Yeah, we don't get bogged down
Right.
too much in details, but Lee wasn't just some goofy guy.
No.
Who was just like, we'll charge and kill them.
No.
Because he was always very careful with his men.
he was at least 2 steps forward.
But he thought this was the place. All of Meade's army is together.
Right.
If I can bust through and route them here north of Washington,
Right.
it'll leave Philadelphia uncovered.
It'll.
If they took Philadelphia, I don't think the Union would have stood much of a chance after that. Because
No.
Philadelphia is the center of America.
Right.
We all talk about Washington, D.C., but the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, it was a capital for a while.
Right.
It was the most populous city for a long, long time.
Yes.
Philadelphia in the 1800s would have been thought of as one of our flagship cities.
Almost like New York or LA today.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And so Lee wasn't just smoking some.
Right,
He
right.
really knew what he was doing, but it was just with the rapid firing weapons
Yes.
and the cannons of the day.
Of course.
It was in 1840 this might have worked.
Right.
In 1850 this might have worked. 1863, no,
No.
no chance.
You have too much technology. You have too much of a increase in movements that it's just unconceivable.
And on top of that, you're no longer attacking green militiamen that have been
Right.
rounded up to become fighters for the Union. You're talking about people who'd fought at Fredericksburg.
Right.
People who had fought, they were veterans. They knew how to fight. Even
Right.
if they'd lost most of those battles, they knew how to fight.
Yes. And again, that's why, again, we call this the turning point in the war. Because, again, we still have 2 years, well, roughly about a year and a half left.
Yeah.
But by this, it's pretty much over.
Right,
I mean,
because
you know.
Gettysburg, of course, go ahead with,
Yeah,
probably
go ahead. Yeah.
So, yeah,
we see here again the siege of Vicksburg.
And this is really Lee's first defeat.
It is.
I mean,
it is.
Before that, Antietam was considered a victory because he retreated back to
Yes.
Virginia, but that was about supplies
Right.
and protecting his flanks,
Mhm.
not about the fact that he'd lost a battle. He
No.
just didn't win the battle.
Right. In the eyes of Lee, that draw was that. It was a draw. It was not a victory like what the North thought. You know, Lincoln's thinking of how he can get the Emancipation Proclamation through. But again, this is again the first defeat of the Army of Northern Virginia.
I mean, it'd be like the Browns
Right.
taking the Patriots to a tie.
Oh my gosh.
That would be, Cleveland would be, they would have a
Ecstatic.
parade.
Exactly. They would be like, "Oh my God, I just won the Super Bowl.
Right.
I'm going to Disney World."
And so Lee being defeated heartens the North in a huge
Oh my
fashion. This
goodness.
is such a shot in the arm. And then, of course, Siege of Vicksburg finishes July 4th.
Yes. And again, this is amazing for Northern morale, like we mentioned.
2 back-to-back victories.
Exactly.
Real quick.
And now you have, again, the Confederacy split into 2 main pieces.
Well, at this point, the Mississippi River is Union territory.
Yes. And anything west of the Mississippi,
It's cut off.
you're gone. You're gone. You don't have any control of Arkansas, Louisiana, or Texas.
I mean, the Texans still have troops. General Hood
Mhm.
is still fighting with the Army of Northern Virginia, but
Yes.
he can't go home.
No, he can't because again, he'd have to go through Union lines in order to get home. And so we see now after the battle, and this is not common or not uncommon. We have memorials all
yes.
over the place
Oh, yeah.
after these battles. But this one is important because again, this is where Lincoln says his famous Gettysburg Address. You know,
Not a very short address.
it's 2 minutes.
What's the other guy? Other guy was
About
talking
an hour.
Talked
Gosh,
forever.
yes.
A William Henry Harrison kind of guy.
Oh my gosh, I know. And the funny thing about it, Lincoln writes this on the train to Gettysburg from Washington.
Because to him, it's just basically it's an internment.
Yes.
I mean, they're getting ready to open up the cemetery
Right.
for Gettysburg for the fallen,
Yes.
and so he's really just saying,
We're here.
Why they fall?
Right.
What was their sacrifice for?
Right.
But he comes up with some of the one of the best speeches for the preservation of the Union you could ever hope
Correct,
for.
correct. I mean, again, he is saying a new birth of freedom, that there is a government for the people, by the people, of the people, will not perish from this earth. I mean, that just, I swear, it gives me chills. It gives me chills just saying those words and knowing.
Heck, it's so famous. It's in Red Dawn.
It is.
It's on the rock.
Yeah.
At the end of the movie.
Right.
Because it's so vital. Because I don't think he was trying to be bombastic or anything.
No.
But after this battle, there is no doubt left in his mind that he is going to lead the Union to victory.
Correct.
And his focus
Right.
is now on how do I heal these wounds.
Exactly. And again, like what we mentioned, 63 being that turning point, by then, he's already thinking Reconstruction.
Right, that's really what he's campaigning on. I
Yes.
mean, he's winning, so
Yes.
he doesn't have to campaign on the war. The newspapers do it for him.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, he's just like, okay, hey, we can do this. We've got a good lead. Let's start thinking post-war.
Because we've got to heal these wounds, bind up
Right.
these wounds.
Right. And again, bind the nation.
Because his goal is to preserve
Right.
the Union.
Yes. Even though he may have switched in that post-Antietam draw/victory with the Emancipation Proclamation, he's still sticking to his guns of saying the Union is still together. We are not going to recognize these southern states as seceders.
They are part of our Union,
Right.
and they will remain so.
Mhm.
And that goes back to that Emancipation Proclamation, because it builds this army.
Right.
It was already a strong army. It was doing
Yes.
well.
Yes.
But the increase in recruits,
Right.
because people who were willing to fight for freedom,
Right.
they weren't willing to fight to make Alabamans be part of America.
No.
That wasn't necessarily a motivating factor, but the concept that they could set, as they would put it, the Negro free,
Right.
was a huge motivator.
Yes.
So you have all these lily white people
Mhm.
coming from the north
Mhm.
to give their lives so that blacks could be free.
Right.
It's a momentous occasion in history
Exactly.
that people are willing to fight for the other.
Right.
These people who aren't them.
Right.
It's big. It destroys the Quakers.
Of course.
Quakers were a large denomination in
Mhm.
early America. William Penn was a Quaker, founded with Quakers were all over the place there. But Quakers are pacifists,
Right.
but virulently anti-slavery.
Right.
So young men, being young men, when forced to choose between the inaction of the prayer house
Mhm.
and going to fight for freedom, choose to fight, and they're not welcomed back. This is one of those denominational things that you look at it and go, what are we talking about? Because we see with the Baptists, they split. They become Northern Baptists and Southern Baptists.
Right.
The Northern Baptists become American Baptists eventually.
Right. Right.
The Methodists split North and South as well. They reconcile later and become the United Methodists that we know of
course.
today.
Mhm.
It tore the nation apart,
Both.
and we see it religiously
Yeah.
very
Right.
much so.
Right.
Because both sides used Scripture to justify their positions.
Of course.
Like pretty much every war after the invention of Scripture.
Right.
I mean, once Scripture became written, people used it to justify whatever action they could come up with.
Exactly.
Politicians have always used religion as a motivator. So,
And it makes sense because everybody, well, presumably, everybody would have a Bible or would know
They're
at least
familiar.
something of it.
in this age, which amazingly enough for me is when you look at statistics, only about a third of the nation at this time went to church on a regular basis.
Really?
Which is about the same as
Wow.
today. But more people had it in their background.
Right.
Like, and we talked about this when we talked about Lincoln before the war.
Mhm.
He was able to use those biblical quotations because people were familiar with those quotations. You know, a
Mhm.
house divided against itself cannot
Oh my
stand.
gosh.
I mean, he's just, Matthew's gospel is just popping out there and people are like, I remember that.
Right.
And it's very motivational. And he motivates with this speech that is so worthy of being written down all over the place.
Exactly.
Like you said, it gives you chills.
It does.
Especially the movie Lincoln. His Daniel Day-Lewis's
Oh my gosh, I
presentation
know.
of that was spectacular.
It was.
It was very spectacular.
I would agree. I would agree. And again, in the war in the West, we're continuing to grow. We're continuing to fight. We're continuing to see now. Grant, by this time, has actually moved to the East.
He gets promoted
Yes,
basically because
yes.
he's now general. Well,
He's
I mean,
general of the Army of the Potomac.
right?
Because
Meade,
yes.
Meade is now commander.
Yes,
chief of staff,
he is
not chief
commander
staff,
of the whole army of the Union forces
Which is-
in Washington.
which is probably a really good spot for him because then he doesn't have to make anybody go anywhere.
right, right. He can just sit in his little office.
And play with his maps.
Yes, but here in the West now, by 64 into 65, we see a gentleman, William Tecumseh Sherman. I
Wasn't
mean,
he pretty short?
he was, and he had a fiery passion.
Big short man syndrome. He's
Yes.
ready to fight anybody.
Of course. And in fact, of course, he does this to Georgia. And
He
they
comes steaming out of Tennessee.
he will howl through Georgia. And as you'll see here, by October of 64, right as that re-election campaign is heating up, because again, we're not seeing it like normal re-elections. You know, it's not like, okay, I'm going to start as soon as I've won my first election or lost my election, I'm going to revamp my campaign. No, you may have started it June, July of that year, and it makes it winnable for him now.